Under the harsh glare of the midday London sun, the bustling crowds surged along the main street in the heart of the city. Jonathan Beggar stood silently before the towering glass edifice of the city's largest tech company, his eyes fixed on the gleaming logo above the entrance. His worn, well-used rucksack, bearing the marks of a life lived outdoors, rested quietly on his shoulders, a testament to his weathered existence. His faded clothes, scuffed shoes, and unkempt silver hair made him look more like a weary laborer seeking shelter than a client entering the prestigious company. But Jonathan Beggar remained motionless, his gaze unwavering, fixed on the transparent glass doors, where he observed well-dressed individuals enter and leave with an air of confidence. A long sigh escaped his chest, light yet profound, as if carrying the weight of a lifetime. Then, he moved forward, slowly but resolutely. The automatic glass doors had barely parted when a cold voice rang out, "Stop right there. You can't come in here." The young security guard, David, stood blocking his path. His determined stance became even more pronounced as his eyes scanned Jonathan's threadbare attire. "This is a tech company, not a charity," David said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You'd be better off somewhere else. You may call upstairs to confirm." "I have an appointment with the CEO," Jonathan's voice was calm but carried a hint of weariness. David let out a laugh, a sound more insulting than humorous. "Don't be ridiculous, sir. There's no way you have an appointment with the CEO." The clients nearby began to turn, their curious gazes mixed with contempt directed at Jonathan. Some shook their heads, shying away as if his presence tainted the sophisticated atmosphere. But Jonathan remained composed, his eyes glinting with determination. "My name is Jonathan Beggar," he said, "just call up and confirm." David was about to reply when a female voice called out from behind, "What's going on here?" A woman in a sharp business suit approached, her heels clicking decisively on the polished stone floor. She, Emily, the floor manager, surveyed Jonathan from head to toe with undisguised disgust. "This gentleman claims to have an appointment with the CEO," David answered quickly, his eyes seeking support from his superior. "Sir, this is a place of business, not a shelter," Emily said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "If you need assistance, you should go to social services." Jonathan maintained his composure, his eyes looking directly at the young woman. "Miss Carter, I am not here to seek assistance. I am here to meet with someone I have an appointment with. Mr. Miller will not be pleased to know that I have been detained." Emily was startled. "How do you know my name?" Annoyance was evident on her face. But before she could say anything, a deep male voice echoed from the stairs, shattering the tense atmosphere. "What's all the commotion?" A middle-aged man in an expensive suit descended, his eyes scanning the crowd before landing on Jonathan. In that instant, the complexion of Bob Miller, the CEO, changed dramatically. His eyes widened, his hands unconsciously gripping the stair railing. Mr. Baker." Bob's voice trembled, as if he had just seen a ghost. Jonathan Beggar nodded, a faint smile crossing his weathered face. "Hello, Bob. It's been a while." Bob rushed down the stairs, ignoring the surprised looks of Emily and David. "Please, come in, Mr. Baker. I sincerely apologize for this misunderstanding." No one spoke as Bob politely bowed, personally leading Jonathan to the elevator. David and Emily stood frozen, neither of them able to comprehend how such a seemingly destitute man could cause the CEO to act so subserviently. As the elevator doors closed, Jonathan turned his head to look at Emily and David, a gentle but knowing smile on his face. "Thank you for your hospitality. Next time we meet, I hope things will be different." His words echoed in the space, leaving Emily with an indescribable feeling of unease. The elevator doors opened, leading Jonathan Beggar and CEO Bob Miller into the quiet, luxurious space of the top floor of the building. In contrast to the bustling, flashy exterior, Miller's office was filled with a heavy atmosphere, as if Jonathan's presence had brought with it a chilling breeze. Bob, normally a confident and powerful man, now seemed diminished. He quietly opened the door, inviting Jonathan in, closing it behind him as if to shut out the curious eyes outside. Jonathan sat down in the chair opposite Bob's desk. The space between them was filled with an uncomfortable silence. Bob fumbled with a glass of water, but his trembling hands caused the water to spill over. He didn't look up, just bowed his head low, trying to organize the chaotic thoughts swirling in his mind. Finally, Bob spoke, his voice hoarse with tension. "Mr. Baker, I really didn't expect to see you here. I thought that, you were dead." Jonathan finished his sentence, his gaze sharp as a knife, looking directly at Bob. "Yes, many people thought so. Perhaps that's what you all wanted, right?" Bob took a deep breath, but couldn't hide the fear in his eyes. "You misunderstand, Mr. Baker. Everything we did was for the company. The situation was very difficult at the time, we had no other choice." Jonathan gave a faint smile, but it held no warmth. "No other choice? Do you say that to justify betraying me, seizing the company I built with my whole life? Or to rationalize the shady transactions, the embezzled funds that I've uncovered over the past 15 years? Bob remained silent, unable to utter a word. He bowed his head, avoiding the gaze of the man sitting before him. Jonathan slowly placed his worn rucksack on the table. Each of his movements was deliberate, like a silent indictment. From the bag, he took out a stack of old documents, the paper yellowed with age, but the words within were as clear as the day they were printed. "This is what I've spent the last 15 years collecting," Jonathan said, his voice low but carrying the weight of a buried past. "Invoices, meeting minutes, bank transactions. All pointing in one direction, to all of you. Every single member of the board of directors participated in the plot to remove me, seize my shares, and even fabricate transactions to push me to the brink of bankruptcy." Bob said nothing, just kept his head down, as if each word from Jonathan was a knife piercing his heart. The atmosphere in the room was stifling, only the soft rustling of paper could be heard as Jonathan continued to cite each piece of evidence. "When I left," Jonathan continued, his voice slow but full of emotion, "you all thought that I would never return, that I would be crushed forever. But you were wrong. It took 15 years. But I found everything. And today, I want a public confrontation. I want to meet with everyone involved." Bob raised his head, his face pale. "Mr. Baker, please. This happened a long time ago. If you wish, I can compensate you." "Compensate?" Jonathan cut him off, his voice ice cold. "You think you can use money to make up for 15 years of my life? You think you can buy back my honor, my self-respect? No, Bob, I don't need money. I need justice." The words were like a sharp blade, making Bob shudder. He nodded, almost mechanically. "All right, I'll arrange it. But, please, Mr. Baker, give me some time." "You have 2 days," Jonathan said, standing up. "I will wait for a meeting with the entire board of directors. If not, I will reveal this truth myself." Bob saw Jonathan to the door, but didn't say another word. When Jonathan's figure disappeared behind the door, Bob stood still, sweat pouring down his forehead. He knew that, this time, nothing could hide the truth. Outside, Emily and David were still standing rooted to the spot. Their eyes following Jonathan with a strange feeling, a mixture of surprise and remorse. As Jonathan passed by, he stopped, looking at them with a calm expression. "The greatest lessons in life often come from mistakes. I hope you both will remember that." Emily couldn't speak, only bowing her head in shame. David also remained silent, his eyes confused as he watched Jonathan's figure disappear out the door. On his way back, Jonathan Baker walked slowly through the bustling streets. Memories of the past flooded his mind, the days when he was a leader, the passionate meetings with his team, and the moment he realized he had been betrayed. The pain was still there. But now, it was no longer a burning fire, but a driving force pushing him forward. That day, he didn't feel lonely. In his heart, a small spark of hope was flickering, the hope that justice, in the end, would be served. In the spacious meeting room, the light from the crystal chandeliers reflected off the glossy brown wooden table, creating a solemn but heavy atmosphere. All the members of the board of directors were present. Their once powerful faces now showed anxiety as they looked at each other, their eyes darting around as if expecting something terrible to happen. At the head of the table, Mr. Thompson, the current chairman of the corporation, sat silently. Next to him was Mr. Roberts, the general manager, who constantly flipped through the documents in front of him but didn't focus on any particular page. The ticking of the clock on the wall marked each passing moment. No one dared to speak. Finally, Mr. Thompson broke the silence. "Bob, are you sure? This? It's hard to believe." His voice trembled slightly, but his eyes couldn't hide his skepticism. Bob, sitting at one side of the table, bowed his head, his hands clasped tightly together. "Mr. Chairman, I met him. There's no mistake. That man is Jonathan Beggar. He's back." The room was filled with a wave of whispers. Everyone turned to look at each other, confusion overwhelming them. Roberts frowned, put down the documents, and asked directly, "How can he be back? We haven't heard anything about him for 15 years. Bob swallowed hard, sweat starting to form on his forehead. "Not only is he back, but he also has a lot of evidence. Documents related to our transactions. He made it clear that he wants to meet with the entire board of directors to confront us." The atmosphere in the room became more suffocating than ever. Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair, his eyes gazing into the distance, as if recalling what had happened. Jonathan was a dedicated co-founder, someone who always put the company's interests first. He sighed softly, his voice dropping, "But we chose a different path." As Mr. Thompson's words trailed off, the meeting room door swung open. Jonathan Beggar entered, his posture calm but carrying a powerful presence that seemed to freeze the entire room in an instant. He was still wearing his old clothes, but his sharp gaze swept across each person in the room, stripping bare every face. "Are you surprised to see me?" Jonathan's voice was gentle but commanding, silencing everyone in the room. He slowly walked to the empty chair opposite Mr. Thompson, pulling it out and sitting down without an invitation. Placing his worn rucksack on the table, he opened it and took out a thick stack of documents. Everyone's eyes were fixed on his every move, as if those actions were the key to unlocking a secret they wanted to bury forever. "I once believed that this company was a family," Jonathan began, his voice not loud but echoing throughout the room. "I dedicated my entire life to building it from the ground up. But what have you turned this family into? A playground for selfish schemes, shady transactions, and betrayal." Mr. Thompson tried to remain calm. "Jonathan, I understand your feelings. But everything we did was to save the company during a difficult time. You know how tough things were back then." "Save the company?" Jonathan smirked. "By pushing me out, faking my death to seize my shares. And then embezzling millions from the investment fund? Do you think I didn't know?" Those words were like a dagger piercing each person in the room. Some bowed their heads, avoiding Jonathan's gaze. But Roberts remained defiant, his voice challenging, "These documents could be fake. How do we know they weren't created to frame us?" Jonathan looked directly at him, his eyes seeming to penetrate any pretense. He slowly placed a USB drive on the table. "Everything is in here. Email exchanges, minutes of secret meetings, and even the bank transactions that you tried to hide. Everything has been sent to the investigative authorities. I came here not to negotiate. but to announce that your game is over." The room fell into a deathly silence. Bob, who had been trembling since the beginning, suddenly knelt down. "Mr. Baker, please. I know I was wrong. I'll do anything to make amends. Just don't expose everything." Jonathan looked at Bob, a flicker of compassion in his eyes. But then he shook his head, his voice like a final declaration. "Forgiveness is not mine to give. Justice is what is needed. You will pay for what you have done." As Jonathan stood up, the room remained silent. He walked out the door, leaving behind those who had once held the power of life and death, now just frightened figures facing the truth. In the hallway, he encountered Emily and David standing silently. Emily looked at him, her eyes red with shame and regret. Mr. Baker," she stammered, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say except I'm sorry. I was wrong to judge you by your appearance." Jonathan smiled gently. "We all make mistakes, my dear. What matters is what we learn from them. Remember, the true value of a person lies not in their appearance, but in their heart and their actions." With that, he walked away, the sunlight in the hallway illuminating his figure, creating an image of strength and determination. Emily stood there, watching him, a sense of resolve rising within her. As if she had just been given the most important lesson of her life. The London sky that morning was still clear, but the atmosphere in the financial district was about to be shattered by a bombshell of information that had just been released. The newspapers simultaneously reported on the biggest scandal in the history of the tech industry, exposing the accumulated wrongdoings within the corporation that was once considered a symbol of success. Images of Jonathan Baker, the forgotten founder, now flooded the front pages. The story of his 15 years of betrayal, forced into hiding, and his journey to reclaim justice became a hot topic, discussed in every corner. At the headquarters of the corporation, chaos reigned. Police cars lined both sides of the street, investigators constantly going in and out, carrying away piles of documents and files. Mr. Thompson, Mr. Roberts, and many other members of the board of directors were taken away for questioning. Their once arrogant faces were now pale, their eyes avoiding every camera lens. Those people, who had once controlled an empire, now stood before an unavoidable judgment. In a small corner, in a simple cafe, Jonathan Baker sat quietly by the window, watching the people passing by. He was still wearing his old clothes, not because he lacked money, but because it was the habit of a person who had experienced the most difficult years. On the table, a cup of coffee steamed, its aroma blending with the morning sunlight. But in his eyes, there was no gloating or arrogance, only serenity and relief, as if a burden had been lifted after 15 long years. The cafe door opened, and Sarah walked in. The young woman no longer had the hesitant or confused look of their first encounter. Today, Sarah looked more mature, her eyes full of determination and gratitude. She looked around for a moment, then approached Jonathan's table. "Mr. Baker," she hesitated, then smiled softly, "May I sit with you?" Jonathan nodded, his eyes gentle. "Of course, my dear. Sit down." Sarah sat down, her hands clasped together, as if trying to organize what she wanted to say. I want to thank you. Not only for giving me a great lesson, but also for giving all of us a chance to reflect on ourselves." Jonathan looked at her, his eyes showing a gentle warmth. "Lessons are something we learn, not something given, Sarah. You recognized it yourself. And that's what matters." Sarah bowed her head, her voice trembling slightly. "But aren't you angry with me? For the way I treated you?" Jonathan shook his head, a faint smile appearing on his lips. "Anger only makes us more tired, Sarah. Mistakes are a part of being human. How we correct our mistakes defines who we are." The young woman looked at him, her eyes shining as if she wanted to say something more, but then she just smiled, silently feeling the relief spreading through her heart. 6 months later, in a small but tidy office in District 3, Jonathan Baker sat behind his desk, intently reading a report. On the wall behind him, the words, "New Dawn Ventures, where true values are honored," stood out against a simple white background. The office door opened, and Sarah walked in, carrying a stack of documents. She was no longer the hesitant young woman in a stiff suit, but now exuded confidence and enthusiasm. "John," Sarah said, her voice now familiar with the more intimate form of address. "Here's the plan for the new project." Jonathan looked up, smiling. "Thank you, Sarah. You've done a great job over the past few months." Sarah blushed, but her smile was radiant. "I'm just trying to learn from you." Jonathan nodded, then gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit down, Sarah. I have something to talk to you about." Sarah sat down, her eyes showing curiosity. Jonathan put down the report, looking at her thoughtfully. "When I started this company again, I thought I just wanted to prove that I could succeed again. But now, I realize that the most important thing is not success, but how we achieve it." Sarah nodded, listening attentively. Jonathan continued, his voice warm and sincere. "I want to build a company that is not only financially successful, but also a place that nurtures ethical values, where people are respected and can grow. And I want you, Sarah, to be a part of that journey." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "John, I want you to be the head of human resources for the company," Jonathan said, his eyes full of trust. "You've grown so much, and I believe you're the best person to ensure that every employee in this company is treated fairly and with respect." Sarah sat there, speechless with emotion. I don't know what to say. This is a huge responsibility." Jonathan smiled, his eyes twinkling. "Age is not a measure of ability. Sarah, I've been observing you over the past few months. You have the compassion, the determination, and the willingness to learn that I'm looking for. I believe you will do well." Sarah bowed her head, feeling the trust that Jonathan placed in her. She took a deep breath, then looked up, her eyes shining brightly. "I won't let you down, John." Jonathan nodded in satisfaction, then smiled. "I know you won't. Now, go and inform your team about this new position. We have a lot of work to do." Sarah left the room, her heart filled with determination. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but she also knew that she had found a place to pour her heart and soul into, and to build true values. A year later, New Dawn Ventures had become a shining name in the business community. Not only was it thriving financially, but the company was also renowned for its ethical management model and social responsibility. In his office, Jonathan Baker looked out the window, where the golden sunlight was shining on the city. He smiled, remembering the journey from the peak to the abyss, and then rising again with a peaceful heart. On his desk was a family photo, the image of those who had always been by his side during the most difficult years. He knew that everything he did, the decisions he made, were for them and for a better future for everyone. The phone rang, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a call from a charity, asking for the company's support for a program to help the homeless. When he finished the call, a quiet joy filled his heart. This was the reason he continued this work, not just to build a successful business, but to make a real difference in the lives of those around him.